They are here with a big round of applause. In a world where disparities persist, policies for the poor and the marginalized represent a beacon of hope, embodying the principle that every individual, regardless of their background or circumstances, deserves the chance to lead a life of dignity and opportunity. These policies are not just a matter of social responsibility, they are a testament to our commitment to building a fairer and more inclusive society for all. The gathering here today represents a significant step towards addressing one of the most pressing challenges of our time. We have amongst us today Professor RAMA, Honorary Director at ICSSR Northern Regional Centre, and Professor Shamika Ravi, Member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. We are delighted to have you both here today. I now invite our guests, our Principal Ma'am, our Vice Principal and IQAC Director Alka Ma'am, Program Convener Dr. Vijay Mishra to partake in the time-honored tradition of lamp lighting. This tradition carries deep meaning as it represents the illumination of knowledge, wisdom, and the spirit of enlightenment. The Honorary Director, ICSSR Northern Regional Centre, Professor at the Centre of Historical Studies, School of Social Sciences, JNU. He has been awarded with the Hendrik Zimmer Chair for Indian Philosophy and Intellectual History at Rupert Karl's University, Heidelberg. He holds a DPhil in Indian Philosophy from Balliol College at Oxford University and a PhD in Sanskrit from Delhi University. His principal areas of specialization are Indian philosophy of language, with special emphasis on epistemology and metaphysics. Please join me in extending a warm welcome and heartfelt welcome to Professor Tiwari. May I now request you, sir, to say a few words to our students.
Thank you very much for those very, very kind words, warm words. Good morning to everybody. Respected Professor Shamika Ravi, Professor RAMA, and other colleagues from this very beautiful college. I think I like it. When I was a student, I always dreamt of being here, coming, either studying or teaching. That never happened, but in a way, my dream has now been fulfilled of coming here a couple of times. This is a special lecture series, as you know, for which you have been all asked to come and listen to one of the finest minds, a formidable person in number crunching, finance, management, Professor Shamika Ravi. So we have come to listen to her. I know next to nothing about finance except the monthly salary that I get. And let me admit that I don't even manage that. Blissfully, my wife takes care of it. I have no access to my account through internet. So that is something that I'm far away, but yes, I am always concerned how much money there will be. Let me begin by introducing not her, because I am not qualified to introduce her. She has been a graduate of this university, and then for many years, over a decade I believe, she was a senior research fellow and whatever you have in the Brookings Institute of Washington DC, as you know. That is the last place that every person in the finance and other person would dream to be in. And then, of course, she came back and she has been roped in recently, last year or early this year, in the very high-powered Economic Advisory Committee of the Prime Minister, where she, of course, juggles her brain with other brainy people. So she is here to talk to us in through this series. This series, let me tell you a little bit about it. This is the ICSSR's Dream Series of Distinguished Lectures. That is the objective of the series. This is 4th or 5th lecture around the country. It is happening. We have planned around 50 lectures in many colleges across the country. We selectively, along with the Member Secretary of the Indian Council of Social Science Research, Professor Dhananjay Singh, my dear friend, again a colleague in JNU, sat down and discussed. And we tried to select people. We, of course, aspired very high. And I can tell you that we have been very lucky that Shamika Ravi ji accepted our request and agreed to come to this college. She is not that easily available. I'm not saying that she is not going to come here, but she just doesn't have time. As you can imagine, in a country of 1.4 billion people, you have this work that she has to do in that committee every day and night. But we are, as I said, very fortunate, lucky and grateful to you that you have agreed to come to this college. This college was selected very carefully by the committee of which I was chairman with the ICSSR. As I said, 50 colleges have been selected. And we also, on our own, decided, in consultation with your great principal, extremely, highly active and very motivating, inspiring principal, Professor RAMA ji. We proposed to her, she said 2 or 3 subjects. And then we decided that this would be perhaps the best thing, because I can tell you, without money, nothing works. You would be surprised to know that for God knows for what reason, I had to work as the finance officer of Jawaharlal Nehru University for 2 years. And you can imagine my background, history, philosophy. The Vice Chancellor said, because the finance officer left and some senior professor had to look after it. So I said, I don't know anything about it. What I did, of course, was I memorized the GFR. More or less, and then I would sign on bills of lakhs and crores. And when I did not understand, of course, you have lots of officials under the finance officer, joint finance officer, deputy finance officer. So I ask their opinion, and then I'll recite Hanuman Chalisa and sign it. In case something goes wrong, so I have somebody to blame. But in any case, this is what we did. I did. So I realized then that anything that I'm standing here speaking, if you speak in terms, if you understand in terms of money, then everything costs money. Which is why our ancient scriptures said, Vidyadhanam Sarvadhana Pradhanam. That is one. And then, wherever there is dhana, there is vidya. So you have knowledge which is supreme of all, but without money, even knowledge would not work. I'll just narrate a very small story because, I'm wavering, because I'm frightened and intimidated to say anything which, might make me sound like a fool in front of an intellectual like yours in finance and money matters. You pick up the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Yagyavalkya is a great sage. He's having a conversation with his 2 wives. And that conversation to me appeared extremely interesting. Or anybody, if you read it, it's a very simple conversation, just like a couple discusses monthly finances. We do, I do, I'm sure everybody does. This, of course, is where Yagyavalkya says, okay, fine, I have established this wonderful school, university, where lots of students come. And those days, of course, the students will come with gifts, and that's how the household will work. Without that, you can't manage anything. You need food for hostel students and whatnot. And he said, I now am reached to the 4th stage of my life, and you guys are learned principals. You take over as the Vice Chancellor and Rector and run this school. One of his wife, of course, catches hold of a corner of his dhoti, He said, hang on, where are you going? I am making it up, this dhoti, etc. is not there in the Upanishad. I would simply assume that must be the scene. He said, where are you going? First you answer my question, which is relevant to us and to you and to the world, and then you can go. So what is it? He said, the objective of your school was to make people happy. Sukha. And people say sukha comes from knowledge. Ultimate knowledge, of course, gives you the ultimate sukha. But that is something which sounds very spiritual, at times eschatological. So, and then she puts a proposition before him. He said, if sukha were the ultimate goal of life, and money were the source of that sukha, which indeed it is, in many ways. If you get good, household, good car, good things, good whatever it is, and I should be discussing even the topical political discussions. No, money somehow makes us run around. Quite rightly, it should. If I had the wealth of the entire universe, will I be happy? Sukhi bhavishyami. She says to Yagyavalkya. And the reply of Yagyavalkya is not dismissive. He acknowledges the importance of money. He says, yes, if you had the wealth of the entire universe, you will be as happy as very rich people. And this is where the dialogue somehow bifurcates. But if you really wanted to have a sukha, which you and I have been discussing and with the students, he said, Atma avare drishtabhyaha, shrotavyaha, mantavyaha, nididhyasitavyaha. So even a person who is indulging or whose business it is to tell about the world beyond, the ultimate sukha, that is, if you look at yourself, look within. So it is the Atma, self. How much money actually do I need? That is the question that Maitreyi and Gargi would put to him. What is the amount of money? But if you're in the business of running a country, you really don't stop anywhere. You just need money, money, money. Perhaps through fair means. That's the only aspect that perhaps could be put. So he says, if you really want to have the ultimate sukha, then there is beyond money. So in any case, what I'm trying to suggest to you is that sukha which you and I may not have seen it, I may aspire for it, I may not have it, but it is only next to that sukha is money, which is why it is extremely important. Therefore, I would end by saying, Sarve gunaha kanchanam ashrayante. All the qualities in here, not simply reside, in here in money. Thank you very much. I hope we'll enjoy listening to that.
Before we proceed, I would now like to request Alka ma'am and Dr. Vijay Mishra to felicitate our principal ma'am, Professor Rama. She is shaping the future of this institution with her guidance and dedication, a role model for both teachers and students. It is a privilege to stand here to introduce our distinguished speaker, who will shed light on a topic of immense importance, policies for the poor and the marginal. Dr. Shamika Ravi is currently a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and Secretary to Government of India. She was Director of Research at Brookings India, Vice President Economic Policy and Observer Research Foundation. Her research focuses on economics of development, including areas of finance, healthcare, urbanization, gender equality, welfare and poverty. Over the last 20 years, Dr. Ravi has taught in postgraduate programs across India, including the Indian School of Business, BIT School of Management, where she teaches managerial economics, game theory and microfinance. She publishes extensively in international peer-reviewed academic journals and writes regularly in newspapers. She has a PhD in economics from New York University, master's from Delhi School, and bachelor's in economics from Lady Shri Ram. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shamika Ravi to the stage with a warm round of applause.
Namaskar, good afternoon, respected Ramanji, Principal Ramaji, Alkaji, dear faculty members and my very dear friends. I have made a deck of slides for you guys in particular because I want to introduce you to how India looks today. I'm not going to give you an opinion. And the reason is because there is a lot of opinion out there in the market. But my moot point that I want you to remember is that, for every anecdote, if someone tells you a story or an opinion, one anecdote can always be pulverized by another anecdote. So if someone tells you this is a great scheme, I have benefited greatly, you can find someone who will say this is a very bad scheme. I suffered a lot. So anecdotes, while they are very powerful because they are stories and personal stories, data is relatively more objective. Large-scale data, self-reported data is far more objective. So when you're thinking of policy making, then you have to put certain degree of trust in data. Now, I am trained to find fault with data. So I'm going to be able to tell you what is the closest we will get to truth. Okay, there are issues and I will also highlight those. But picking on from where Hiramalji left off, I am going to talk beyond money. Because development policy, of course, at the end of the day, and as students of economics, even if you're not from economics, you must know that there is always a trade-off. Every decision that you make has an opportunity cost. Which means we are taking away resources, whether it is money, your time, your effort, from something else. So there is a cost to everything that we do. So I'm going to broadly talk about development policies in India. Just look at this. This is telling you real per capita GDP. Real meaning it is taken into account inflation over time, right? Per capita because there are big economy, small economy, but what really matters is per capita basis pe how much money you have. Not very long time back, I'm nearly 50. Around the time of my birth, an average South Korean, an average Chinese and an average Indian were identical. Meaning their quality of life, their per capita income, same. And within 40 years, what you have noticed is today South Korea is more than 15 times richer than us per capita. China is now 5 times richer than us. And we are picking up. But know the relative difference and what policies can lead to. Why policy making is very important? क्योंकि growth जो है वो ऐसे vacuum में नहीं होता है. Proper growth and how it translates to inclusive growth, which means it must have an impact on quality of life of average citizens. And remember, at the back of everything, we will always bring in our democratic institutions. We vote for change, we vote for reforms, we vote for policies. So you cannot ignore development in countries like India. Okay, next. If in isolation you look at our story, this is India's per capita growth. It's very impressive. Right? If you notice, and to those of you who have interest in data, if I tell you, अच्छा इसको गौर से देखिए, inflection point कब है? Meaning, when did the country really take off? The common perception people have is it is 1991. But actually, nahi. If you look at data very closely, the break point is around 2000. उसको हम कहते हैं structural change. So, lesson from that is it is important to reform and change rules and laws. But that change in itself is not going to overnight lead to a big increase in per capita growth, etc. So there is a lag. But what else happened around the year 2000? The government started to make huge capital expenditure, meaning roads, airways reform, telecom reforms, right? Retail reform. India went from being energy deficient country to becoming energy surplus country in those 8 years. All of them took reforms. Alright? So it is important for you to recognize that when we look at the global growth in the neighborhood, then you feel, why aren't we growing as much as China? Because we are not China, thank God. But there are some countervailing forces which slow us down, but it is a much more sustainable and a much more inclusive growth. Now this takes me to the point of Professor Tiwari, ki bhai, it's not just money, we are interested in development. After all, the point of the lecture is policies of development, particularly for poor and marginalized. तो ये है human development indicator. Human development indicator में अगर आप देखेंगे, then the difference is not that wide. That is China versus India. वो क्या दिख रहा है आपको? वो जो horizontal अगर आप sleeping line बनाएंगे, it will give you the time difference in human development indicator between a China and an India, and while economically we are around 22, 23 years behind China, developmentally we are just around 8 to 10 years behind them. And the lesson is again very clear. They have much more money, but we have money plus democracy, which means you are voting. You cannot ignore development policies. All right? Which is why this is almost like a parallel shift. We are on our way to becoming a high human development indicator country in another 4 or 5 years. This is telling you that after the pandemic, every country underwent a huge shock. And I'm going to talk about from poverty eradication. If you look at the sustainable development goals, India today looks green, meaning we are well on path, time-wise, to attaining our sustainable development targets. Much richer countries, Brazil, South Africa, these are richer countries, but they're all in red. They're falling behind. Poverty is rising in these countries. So it's very important for you to recognize these realities of the global economy. That COVID has been a shock, but it is on account of policy making and proper management of these crises that you are still on your way to attaining sustainable development goals. But richer countries, so it's not just resource, richer countries are falling behind. So you need proper policy making and proper management. Now this particular slide is for those of you who worry when you read your newspaper, how India is getting more intolerant. And as the foreign press, as the Western media would have you believe, and we shouldn't say Western media, it's global media really. And that is an opinion. I started by saying it's an opinion. You have to see hard data. These are riots in India. Why do I study riots? Because riot is a very well-defined variable. A riot is a violent episode which involves 5 or more people for a common purpose. And it is registered in the police station. Then it is recognized as a riot. What are you seeing? In the late 80s, India used to have more than 1 lakh riots every year. So talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents. Ask them, kya hal tha? Today, we have around 37,000 riots. And 37 is still a very large number. But please recognize the long-term trend that this country is witnessing. In the last 30 years, you have had what we call a structural break. Riots have been coming down sustainably, steadily. And this is on account of course, better policing, better technology, all of that. But it is also because there is more to lose now. The opportunity cost of violence in the streets is rising. So the neighborhood also forces people away. They don't want this kind of violence. There is greater vigilance in community as well. So this is a well-established literature that opportunity cost of violence rises as countries get more affluent. It's not just policing. Okay? So there is resistance to this kind of stuff. India is far more peaceful, if that's the opposite of rioting, today than we have been in last 50 years. So we must recognize that objective truth. You know what these are? These are crime against women, particularly rapes. Why do I want to study this? Because again, it's a very well-defined variable, jiska definition badalta nahi hai. So you want to see time trends. What are you seeing? You're seeing these are all the states. सबसे पहले आप देखोगे कि around 15, 16, 17 is when states, almost all states, BJP states, opposition states, सब जगह. So it is not just reporting. सब जगह एक structural break आ रहा है. Episodes of rapes are coming down. Not everywhere. We still have instances, आप देखो हरियाणा है, झारखंड है, राजस्थान है. These 3 states are still continuing to report more and more rapes, but it's a large country, people. On the whole, what you're seeing, state after state after state, rapes are coming down. Why do you think so? 2015, 16, 17 में ऐसा क्या हो गया? What happened in this country that these kind of crimes began to come down? Hold on to that thought. I hope somebody in the hall is able to think of some reason. These are infant mortality rates. You know why we study infant mortality rate? Because eventually we can argue about बच्चा मोटा है कि पतला है कि stunted है कि underweight, and there are measurement issues and there experts we will continue to quibble. But mortality में कोई data issue नहीं होता है. Mortality means the baby has died. Infant mortality is also one of the metrics of sustainable development goals. So ये तो हमें पकड़ के रखना है. We have to improve these metrics. What are you seeing? These are all the states of the country. On the x-axis you have real per capita GDP growth. तो economic growth के साथ क्या हो रहा है infant mortality का? State after state. The big states, when the balls are big, it basically means these are highly populous states. And small ones are small, of course. The rightmost panel are your poorest states. Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, etc. Beach में you have the southern states. And on the left panel you have the rest of the country. क्या दिख रहा है आपको? Everywhere infant mortality is crashing with economic growth. This is what growth is about. Growth is not about what you read in the papers, Ambani, Adani, capitalist, no. That is a very small sliver, that is a very, very myopic and a very narrow and political way of looking at things. This is what economic growth gets you because this is also the time when the country, of course, governments are running national health mission, बहुत कुछ चल रहा है, लेकिन over and beyond all of that, there are tons of studies that have proven when there is clean drinking water, when there is better electricity, when roads are around, when your primary health centers run, when you have access to hospitals, etc. Those are the reasons. It's economic growth which is your biggest contributor to improvement in quality of life. This is a metric for that. Okay? This graph is telling you on the x-axis you have reduction in neonatal deaths. Neonatal deaths क्या होता है? Babies dying within 28 days of live birth. And on the y-axis you have real per capita GDP ka growth. These are all your states. First of all, do you realize there is a positive relationship? On the whole, states of India are not only growing economically, they are also reducing neonatal deaths. That is what we call growth with development. The two things go hand in hand. So in fact, the only recipe for inclusive growth that we know is economic growth plus development spending. It cannot be one versus the other. If you try to have too much development spending without growth, it's like putting the cart before the horse. If you have too much focus on growth without focusing on development, you'll have all kinds of societal problems. So, inclusive growth requires per capita GDP ka growth, economic growth chahiye, and you have to spend more on development. Now, what do you see? The first quadrant are your economic superstars. 300% real per capita growth बढ़ा है. कहाँ बढ़ा है? गुजरात में 300%. Real, meaning it's inflation adjusted, and per capita है. People have grown 3 times richer in the last 18 years. And then you have Tamil Nadu where they have grown 2.5 times richer. You have Karnataka, Maharashtra. These states have seen phenomenal economic growth. And they're also improving neonatal deaths, meaning institutional deliveries. And jahan pe births are properly managed, great. The ones on the bottom quadrant, and of course it's all relative, you are seeing states jahan pe growth bhi kam hai aur neonatal deaths ka reduction bhi kam hai. And those are typically, it's many of our states there. You have, of course, UP, Bihar, you have West Bengal, Rajasthan, so on and so forth. But the places that you have to look at are places like Assam and Punjab, jahan pe economic growth kam hai, but improvement in neonatal death is there. And then you have Haryana and Kerala, jahan pe economic growth is happening, reduction in neonatal death kam ho raha hai. Kerala, because already reduction has happened, so further reduction is lesser and lesser. Haryana, we have to pay more attention. क्योंकि वहाँ healthcare जो है बहुत private है. So we have to improve. ये क्या है? This is maternal mortality. And that's the reason we have to study mortality number, because बाकी में you can have problems. These are deaths. Death में there is no uncertainty around it. Maternal mortality, look at the way the world is reducing. Those are the orange bars. And look at the way India is reducing. Look at the blue bars. India is reducing maternal mortality at 5 times the pace of the world. So we are having a major breakthrough in maternal mortality. Great metrics. अब देखो, we want to worry, you've been hearing the term आत्मनिर्भरता. अब इसका क्या मतलब होता है? What does आत्मनिर्भरता translate into in terms of policy? There are some sectors which are strategic, जिसपे we do not want to be dependent on any external agencies or countries. Food is one of them. Energy is the other, and defense is the third. So it's almost like you have to consider the strategic sector. Food में क्या दिख रहा है आपको? Our industrial, what we call, in fact, it's an index which captures how much production is happening. We have crossed 100 long time back, meaning we are producing more than we are consuming now. So production is not our problem. When you study agriculture, productivity is not as much of a problem as distribution. तभी जब टमाटर का भाव कहीं बढ़ता है 2-3 हफ्ते में, it's all over the newspapers. But it is not a shortage that is causing. It's mostly distributional problem. कि भाई cold storage ठीक नहीं है, trucking is not fine, the roads are not as. So those are second order things, and that's why most of our reforms are focused on. Look at the amount we import. Earlier, food used to be 33% of all our imports. Aaj it is down to 4%. And why do we still import? Because now ask yourself, how many of you like fancy avocados? You like fancy cheese, Swiss cheese? And that will remain, because as you have economic growth, there is a segment which likes finer things and globally, and they can afford it, and free markets ka matlab hai, we will continue to import those things, but we are not strategically dependent for food security. Ab dekho, it's a very big country. So all India to maine stories aapko bata diye, but always remember, India is really a grouping of state economies. State governments and local policies have a lot of weightage. These are all your states. Do you see they are growing at very different rates? So in the 20 years, सबसे ऊपर है Goa and Delhi. In fact, the difference between Goa, Delhi and Bihar is the same as South Korea and India. So we have considerable variation within the country. और ये होगा. We have breakout states, but beyond the point, we want to balance it off. We cannot have very lopsided growth model. सबसे पहले, what do you notice? You have breakout states like Sikkim, Uttarakhand, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Haryana. These states are bucking the all India trend. They are growing very fast. And then we have states which are not growing. मतलब बहुत कम grow कर रहे हैं compared to all India. सबसे ऊपर देखिए, Delhi is not even a full state, correct? Goa तो अभी state बना है 18-20 साल पहले. Punjab used to be the richest state of the union. Today the per capita GDP of Punjab is the same as Nagaland. और Nagaland का growth model क्या है? Nobody knows. It's mostly government funding from Delhi and large spending by government. So then that's a story we want to worry about a little bit. What happened that Punjab, the fastest growing and the richest state in the union, is now not being able to keep up with the other states. And I'll tell you that story in again 5 minutes. Then anyone from Bihar here? Okay. 3 of you. तो हम लोग सबसे नीचे हैं. Right? Bihar is right at the bottom. What do you notice with time trend? Do you notice that per capita GDP of Bihar does not move in the initial 5-6 years of this data point? It begins to move only after 2005. In fact, the per capita GDP of Bihar in 1991 and 2005 are identical. 15 saal, when the country was growing, when there is a lifting of the tide, this is the fast paced whatever growth I showed you. बिहार में ऐसा क्या हुआ कि 15 साल your per capita GDP same. It is misgovernance, and we have to call it for what it is. So when I speak as an economist, I have to convince you, students, you don't live in an economy, you live in a society. What does that mean? Your political institutions matter. Your social institutions will matter. So we can have all the great economic policies that you want, but if you do not have proper governance, you're not going to see economic growth. In fact, Bihar had negative per capita growth in the first 10 years of liberalization. Minus. Matlab economy shrunk. Now imagine, what does this mean for poverty eradication? What does it mean for all these metrics of development that we are keen to follow? So keep that in mind. Now that black line, these are how growth is happening across. 18 years back, an average Haryanavi was poorer than, in fact, everybody was poorer than a Punjabi. per capita basis. 18 साल पहले an average Haryanvi was much poorer than an average Punjabi. Today, a person from Haryana is 1.5 times richer than a person from Punjab. 1.5 times in 18 years. You know what that's telling you? It's telling you that the only state in the country where we are seeing active deindustrialization, while you're worried about Make in India jobs, etc., everywhere else, the state which is seeing active deindustrialization, meaning industry is running away. There is no more industry left. Punjab. Where are people running off to? They're not going to China and Vietnam. Where are they going? They're moving to Himachal Pradesh. They're moving to Haryana, Gujarat, Rajasthan. And this again tells you why states or economies that are reliant on agriculture, this is a very basic point in economics, agriculture ka growth in productivity, value that it creates, how does it compare with value creation from manufacturing and services? Food security is very important. But when you think of jobs and growth, agriculture is not going to do it. In fact, greater development in agriculture means more mechanization and lesser labor. Farmers' children do not want to be farmers. They want to move up. Everybody's aspiration. So what you're seeing is, Punjab is that black line you're seeing, the thick line. Every state that is there, they were all poorer than Punjab, they're all racing ahead, and look at that gap, it is growing more and more. So while rest of the country, it's a positive story when you look at a state because growth ho raha hai. And good stories are great because everything starts to work out, development wise. But jahan pe slowdown hota hai, that leads to all kinds of tensions. And it's a border state. Okay? So Punjab now is becoming a case study on things to avoid. Now, in terms of government policy, what does it mean? That cross-subsidization. When I tax one sector to subsidize another sector, there are limits to how much I can do that. If I tax industry to create revenue that I want to give to my farmers, and I continue taxing industry, the thinking that is infinite, आपका budget constant नहीं रहता. Over time, those guys will move. That is what has happened. You know, when I was in college, even till college, almost all our sports equipments came from Punjab. All our woolen wear, bicycles, everything came from Punjab. Today, nothing. Those same industry, people from Punjab, they have moved out. Because you are taxing industry to give subsidies to agriculture. So there are limits. And that is where you have to understand, people vote for policies, you have entrenched groups, everybody has one vote. So what is the policy that eventually the state decides? This is the story of connectivity. These are density functions. The economy of India has undergone a complete revolution in the last 8 years. In what form? Almost 95% of households in every district is reporting that they have a bank account, they have Aadhaar, and they have mobile telephony. The beauty of it is, Aadhaar and bank account has mostly happened on the back of government effort. But mobile phone, almost entirely from private initiatives. Right? So it has taken both the government and the private sector to make this core infrastructure, this digital infrastructure that we have today, on which we are mounting almost all our welfare. But what you read in the newspaper is only the welfare side of the story. Ki bhai, we can do DBT because we have JAM. Yes, welfare is part of the policy, but what you are not hearing is what the business schools teach, which is you have an entire economy jahan pe business solutions are there, revenue models are there, which are getting mounted on this infrastructure. The fact that people have mobile, the fact that people have Aadhaar and payments, etc. are possible, it's led to this entire digital business, the whole e-commerce business, where your tier 3, tier 4, the biggest growths are happening in small townships. Your economy is undergoing a huge change. There's a lot of wealth creation happening at that level, meaning there is business model. Okay? There are new businesses emerging in those areas. That is another part of it. It's not just about welfare. Okay? It's not just about government. This is to give you a reality check of how is wealth concentrated in India. Because you will often hear in the newspaper, India has a north-south divide, right? But if you graph, by the way, this is real-time data from the National Family Health Survey, and this is wealth, it's not income. क्योंकि income data noisy होता है. Wealth data is relatively, भाई आपके पास घर है, fridge है, TV है, wealth and assets. These are easier to measure. What do you notice in India? Every red dot is a 1,000 poor households, a yellow dot is 1,000 middle class household, and a green dot is 1,000 rich households. क्या दिख रहा है? Does India have a north-south divide? But divide तो है. What is that difference? You can draw a line from Srinagar to Kanyakumari. Wealth in the country is mostly concentrated on the western part of the country, while poverty is concentrated on the eastern part of the country. So our national policies, ab dhime dhime they are becoming meaningless. We have to get further down into localized policy making. So welfare ki zyada se zyada schemes have to be much more focused on local level. All right. It's also telling you that western parts are the industrialized belts. That's why during Corona you saw people move back to the eastern part. That's because labor is coming from east to work in the industrialized belt. The wealth creation is mostly happening in the western part. And this is the urban and the rural gap. Urban India, देखिए, it is overwhelmingly green. Urban poverty hota hai. There are people that are poor in urban areas. But overwhelmingly, do you see, urban India is green. In fact, if you look at the concentration of greenery, you know which cities these are. That's why we say cities are engines of economic growth. We have to begin investing more in city building. And you are seeing that after 75 years, in fact, last budget, there was an announcement of, there's a committee for city planning now. It also tells you कि अभी तक हमारे cities कैसे emerge हो रहे थे, ऐसे, organically, mushroom की तरह. And that is why, since you're in Delhi, you know the difference between Noida and Gurgaon. दोनों दिल्ली के पास हैं, but there is a world of difference between Noida and Gurgaon. Noida is very well planned, but for the longest time they didn't get any investment and money because भाई UP सरकार था. Law and order was an issue, you didn't get much investment, or the airport, or whatever. Haryana grew. But the problem with that kind of growth is another, which is Haryana is what we call Millennial City. But Haryana was being governed not through an urban local body. 2008 में we established an urban local body in Gurgaon. 2008 तक who was governing Gurgaon? Panchayats. Do you realize what I'm trying to drive home? Your real economy is racing much ahead, much faster than what you're able to pick up. And the governance is racing behind. You're trying to keep up with an economy which is moving really fast. ये urbanized हो रहा है, चाहे आप govern करें ना करें. So we better get the house in order. That is why these committees, why city planning, why urbanization, and what does it mean overall? क्योंकि once a city is established, फिर उसका sewerage ठीक करना, electricity ठीक करना, roads ठीक करना, very expensive. It's much easier to do it when in the beginning, right? So you need proper governance, meaning we need urban local bodies, and that is going back to the 74th Amendment. कि दिल्ली से state headquarters, state capital में power जाता है, federal structure में, and state capital से it has to go to the city, because governance of a city is as important as governance of a state. Your major cities are a very significant part of state economy. Bangalore contributes a very large chunk of Karnataka economy. Hyderabad, almost all of Telangana is Hyderabad centered. Gurgaon to Haryana. So cities are very important. Okay? अब ये देखिए, this is something you guys will be keen on. This is unemployment rate. अच्छा कुछ तो weird हो रहा है. The red bars are unemployment for people between the age of 18 and 29. And the grey bars are unemployment of people above the age of 30. Why is it that the youth today are almost 5 times more unemployed than people after 30? ऐसा क्या हो जा रहा है at the age of 30 that people are going out and working? This is a global phenomenon. We call it youth inactivity. In fact, the IMF has come up with several reports documenting what is being called youth inactivity. But I think it's really euphemism. It's a nice way to say the young don't want to work. 30 में ऐसा क्या हो जा रहा है भाई? Your parents are basically telling you बस, अब बस एग्जाम लेना बंद करिए, जाइए, go make something of your lives. So youth unemployment is a concern, but the solution is not as simple as we are making out to be. Why do I say that? ये देखिए, this is both are youth, मतलब 18 to 29, but the gap is between the red bars are the most educated, graduate and above, मतलब आप भी नहीं है अभी उसमें. Graduate and above are 6 times more unemployed than relatively illiterate people in the economy. So the more educated you are, the less likely you are to be working. Almost 6 times. Now when we went to college, we were in school, we were told, my parents were in the government, we were basically told, if you don't study, it's up to you, it's your life, you want to mess it up. Padhiye so that you get a decent job. So education was linked to jobs and progressing in life. Today that's not the case. Your most educated are the ones more likely to be not doing anything economically productive. Now that is from the one side of the story. Simultaneous to this data, there is another data which is industry से जब आप पूछेंगे कि what is your biggest constraint to growth today? कि भाई आपका business इतना है, why don't you grow? They will all tell you, finance is not the problem in India today. We can raise the capital. The biggest constraint to economic growth of existing firms and new firms is skilled manpower. It is very difficult to get skilled people. So how do the two things exist? कि भाई सबसे ज़्यादा जो पढ़े and skilled हैं, वो काम नहीं कर रहे, और जहाँ पे they want, वहाँ they're not able to find it. This is a major mismatch because the market doesn't value the degree. The market values skill. A skill is valuable and they are willing to pay for it, but a degree doesn't mean that much anymore. Okay? That is why you now understand why for us Skill India, skilling in India, it's very, very important. Strategically, it is one of our most important policies because we have to reduce this gap between what the market wants and what we are educating in the classrooms. And this is not just in college level. This is quality of education is a concern right from pre-primary. So you are good at taking exams and we get the brightest and the brightest, but that's just filtering. That smartest wala skill is not what industry wants. Industry wants people who can get the job done. So reskilling, making people employable. We didn't have a term called making someone employable. One assumed that if you had the degree, you were employable. Not anymore. Okay? So that's a very important thing. The second is, we have to really manage expectations of the youth now. The expectation that I have now got a degree, so now I am deserving of a great job. Jisme I will get, I will work few hours, I will have someone saluting me, I need a house. No, that entire nature of that economy has already shifted. Which is why you have Stand Up India and Startup India and all those programs, because managing expectations means don't keep waiting for a job to come to you. You have to actively be looking out and not just government jobs. Because economies that have a very large proportion of the people employed with the government are not the best of economies. Those are not economies that grow. They are inherently non-innovative, they are stagnant economies. And the example at home, when I told you Nagaland, 10% of the Naga population is employed with the government. You know who comes closest to that internationally? Sri Lanka. So you saw what happened in Sri Lanka recently? One of the biggest reasons why they are not able to overcome it, of course, these are small economies and they have few sectors, so वो बहुत diversified नहीं होते हैं. So when there is one shock to that sector, the whole economy goes bust. But you can still reform, right? You can still change things. Not if a very large group in your economy does not want any change. That is why having too many people, having a government which is very heavy, is not the most efficient way to go about it. Okay, we need efficient governance, but not large governance. Right? The other point about managing expectations is convincing the parents. So this is something I have noticed myself. In teaching at NYU, a lot of my students, CV pe, they are very proud to show that I started this program, वो 2 हफ्ता चला फिर went bust. Or I started this body and it ran for 6 months and then I failed. Failure is something you put on your CV. Because it's not failure, it is telling me that you have experimented. That you are open to try, you are entrepreneurial. हमारे यहाँ नहीं होता है. We want to only showcase by 100%. I was there and I became like the CEO, otherwise आप कुछ नहीं लिखेंगे. No. Entrepreneurship का मतलब ही है कि only 3 to 4% will succeed. The rest will fail, and that is what leads to improvements in the economy. That is just the nature of the beast. So we also have to become more risk-taking. And let me tell you, your generation, I don't have to, you know this. Hamare time when we were in college, all the cool kids used to carry guitars. That's not true anymore. Almost all the cool kids in the business schools, because I teach mostly in business schools, they all have a startup. They have some cool idea about technology ko karke, kahan, Arunachal mein they are selling affordable healthcare. You know, the world has infinite possibilities and they are getting unleashed. And that is exactly what the country needs. But we have to manage. We can't be scared of failures. We have to try. Now, there is another thing that you have to be aware of, which is the country has a growth policy. And I mean now at a way how we think. You know, 1940s after the World War, large economies like the US had a particular growth path. They basically made all basic amenities available to everybody. Roads sabke paas honge, electricity sabke paas. These kind of large expansion in basic amenities, you know what it leads to? Long-term sustainable growth in productivity. You become more productive if you have roads and clean drinking water and basic amenities. That is the phase we are in. In the last 8 years, what you see, and these are the poorest 20% of the population. So bottom quintile bolte hain. Bottom quintile, bottom 20%. 53% used to have electricity. Today that number is close to 90%. And do you see, this is again because you want to break fake narratives. Ki bhai, this is a majoritarian government, it only gives to one category and so on and so forth. This is where data is very important. Politics rehne dijiye jahan politics is politics. But you have to look at numbers to understand administration kaise chal raha hai. And there you see, whether you dissect the data across religious categories, you dissect it over social categories, every category has gained significantly. In fact, if you look at it closely, then minority groups are actually gaining more. And this is electricity. By the way, in the government, you've often heard the Prime Minister say, saturation policy. Basic amenities to all citizens, everywhere, all the time. That is the policy. So that is electricity. If you look at bank accounts, what do you see? The number of Indians with bank account has doubled now. Okay? That number is now close to 93% for the poorest segments also. Achha, this is not government data. This is self-reported survey data. So these are what people are telling you. So if anything, this is an underestimate. Because of course the government, when I speak to them, they'll tell me 100% electrification. No, 100% kuch nahi hota, kahin nahi. But when you speak to people and that number is like 98, 99, that's a very good number. There is no more gender gap. In fact, India is one of the very few countries globally jahan access to bank accounts mein male-female koi gap nahi hai. That's because your Jan Dhan Yojana basically targeted women. So ab koi gap hai. Okay, this exists even in OECD, the richest countries in the world. In सब चीजों का एक second order effect होता है. I can make amenities available, but it's not just for its own sake. What does it lead to? And you've heard the PM talk about second order effect. इसका मतलब having bank account is associated with improved reproductive health outcomes. People seeking more care and more public amenities, etc. You see, access to credit has improved because people have bank accounts now. It is related to poverty reduction. This independent study has nothing to do with government, right? This has come out of World Bank, the NIH study, Australian University study. This is bank accounts. What about mobile telephony? Everybody has a mobile now. In fact, it's become, the time is right for us to do a study around why is mobile phone a gain or is there also a distribution effect? Meaning there are segments that are losing out because the whole day we are on our phones. So what is it doing to our labor productivity, right? Okay. And of course the impact of mobile phone is tremendous, and during COVID we realized that having a phone was a lifesaver, particularly if you look at access to education. Right? In the poorest segments, most kids were doing classes on the phones. Toilets. Now this is going back to the rape data that I showed you. There is a beautiful Lancet study, very comprehensive, which tells you that access to toilet, when we were writing a great deal about toilets to hona chahiye, the motivation was open defecation free. Q, IMR, MMR, because you had fecal matter in the food and water, it was leading to all kinds of ailments and deaths. So the motivation was from health. But what is this unintended consequences that we saw in society? Accessing toilets led to 14% reduction in rapes and 22% reduction in crime against women in the first 2 years itself. Can you imagine what that means? Because toilets is not just health and hygiene for women, because toilets are highly gendered. Right? The guys go anywhere, the women can't. And you know this. I don't have to tell you, you're part of the society. Access to toilet has been one of the most revolutionary interventions. And socha jaye then it's something so basic. There's nothing high-tech about it, right? Mostly what we worry about. So now we are getting to a realm of precision policy making. Now national level par, there is no problem which is a national problem. Your infant mortality is concentrated on 7 states. 10 states have already achieved the Sustainable Development Targets of 2030. So India is a very large country. You've heard people say that. But the real way to understand, we have a Germany in India, we also have a sub-Saharan Africa in India. So we have one segment which is super efficient, super mechanized, fast growing. There is another segment which we have to still worry about malnutrition and access to basic education, etc. These things coexist. So policy making now has to get into the realm of what we call precision policy making. All right, not national level. And that's where data matters. And if you've been reading most of my focus now is on the quality of data. क्योंकि national level पर IMR जान के हम क्या करेंगे? हमें तो पॉलिसी लाना है भोपाल में, और भोपाल से भी क्या करेंगे? मुझे तो रेवा का चाहिए, और रेवा से भी क्या करेंगे? I need that aspirational block, जहाँ पे बच्चे are not surviving, right? So problems now are localized, and the only way to capture it is data. And so just 2 minutes, because we are unraveling some great reforms we have done, and the first one is pensions. And it's for you guys to now critically think about some of these issues. Pension reforms, we started giving out, agar 90 se dekha jaye, so are you seeing the graph? In the beginning, the red line is rising really fast. The red line is shooting up, that is all India average. And state after state, we started spending a lot on pension because we are aging and people are retiring and they're getting pension. So uska cost बढ़ता गया. And then you realize that the old pension scheme, the way it existed, is not sustainable. So then the new pension scheme was brought in 2003. And what is the new pension basically about? The reform was कि भाई इसको contributory in nature कर दीजिए. उसके बाद, do you see, after the vertical line, state after state, फिर वो थोड़ा flat हो गया. So the burden of pension was rising, but then it flattened. Now state after state, we are undoing the pension reform. So this country's reforms are not always in the most progressive. Sometimes, and whom does pensions favor? It is not the bottom 2 quintile, 3 quintile that I'm talking about. It is to the very well organized 5% of the state, government employees. और वो money आ कहाँ से रहा है? It is coming from development spending. So when a state says I'm going back to old pension, it's basically saying I'm going to take money away from development, roads, hospitals, colleges, everything that goes into development, and I'm going to give it to people who are well organized. And that is again one of those issues about democracy we need to think about. This is interest payments. There are many states which are taking very big loans. और interest payment कहाँ से आएगा? When a state spends money, you break it into development spending and non-development spending. Development spending is everything like infrastructure, education, health, welfare. They are all development. और non-development में क्या आता है? Pensions, interest payments, and administration पे कितना खर्च करती है? Money running of the state. These are your biggest 3 components of non-development. And you're seeing what is happening to, did you see, before FRBM, which is the Fiscal Responsibility Act, states, look at the pension, look at the interest burden, aise बढ़ रहा till 2003-4. फिर उसके बाद it came down. So reforms have a real impact. Reforms have an immediate impact in these cases. If we don't do it, we are going to be stuck with very large, some state fiscal situation is very, very precipitous. All right? It's in a form where we cannot afford to. The last is, what about future growth? Which are the states that are going to continue growing and which are the states that are going to struggle? And one metric which is very good to look at future growth is how much is the state spending on capital outlay, meaning improvement of its infrastructure, whether it is social infrastructure or physical infrastructure. And this is telling you that if you just look at some of the states, between the red line, which is the national average, where do you see the gap the biggest? वो red line और blue line के बीच gap कहाँ है? Bihar, West Bengal, Punjab. There are 3 states which the gap between all India spending on capital outlay and future growth and these states is growing very rapidly. So if a state does not invest in development and long-term capital outlay, तो future growth आएगा कहाँ से? This is a very important question that students of not just economics, but policies in general should be very concerned about, because remember, India is a very large country. Delhi has a role, but Delhi has a limited role. We have to worry about sustainability and viability of state governments, all right, and their fiscal status. Okay, people. With that, I come to an end. I'm very happy to take questions if there are any. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am, for your enlightening session. We now open the floor to question and answers. Do we have any questions here?
Well, very good afternoon, ma'am. So, in one of the slides, you talked about graduate unemployment, where you talked that there is a mismatch between the demand and supply of the skills in the job market.
Yeah.
But don't you think it is institutionally very tough, considering the level of technological developments happening around? It's very tough to reduce the gap to a substantial amount, considering the population of India, educational institution constraints as well as budget constraints. So how do institutions look at this from a policy perspective?
So how do you reduce unemployment?
Yeah.
So ma'am, I wanted to ask, like you mentioned that agriculture in Punjab is not really viable for economic growth. As such, the situation exists. So my question is, given that the dominant social group continues to engage in agriculture and, as you said, does not want economic change. So how do we make agriculture more economically viable and less dependent on industrial subsidies so that Punjab can actually grow with the other states and the rest of the country?
Okay, ma'am. So firstly, like the most pertinent question which I feel with regards to this lecture, it is titled as Policies for the Poor and Marginal Communities, and I feel that inequality is something which we should focus on. Ma'am, so inequality as claimed by Thomas Piketty and Emmanuel Saez, it's back to the pre-independence level, and in the World Inequality Index we rank 127th out of 146 countries. So in that scenario, how is this fitting in with the development work that is being undertaken by the government? So
Let's start with the last one first, inequality. It's very important to understand that there are first order concerns and then there are second order concerns. In India, we still have 3% absolute poverty. Okay? And for us, that is our biggest concern. Not that inequality is not important. Inequality is very important, also because politically it's a live wire. So no government, no political party can ignore inequality. But if it means having to give up on growth, then that's a very costly trade-off right now. Why? Because we have to grow. We have to grow because poverty reduction otherwise nahi hoga. And we need to grow in a way that you saw. That with economic growth, you have improvements in almost all development outcomes, particularly poverty. And in fact, in India, multidimensional poverty has now been halved. And it's only because we have the resources to do that. All right? So inequality is important, but absolute poverty is more important, right? Now, why is it a concern for the rich nations? So again, this is another key takeaway, and I want you to always don't mimic your life and your country's worries and concerns based on what you read in the international press. For them, inequality is a bigger concern. Why? Because actively they have the distributional impact of gains of globalization is not even. There are people who have gained a lot from their growth in the last few years, and there are many people who have lost out from that growth. हमारा वो situation नहीं है. We have gained from globalization. We have brought out 300 million poor from poverty. For us, the gains are much, much larger. So we cannot just be concerned with their concerns for those nations much bigger. Question about Punjab. It's a very important question, my dear. But it is something which is very well entrenched, and the solutions will have to be political and policy. Economic, let me just tell you, agriculture is subsidized everywhere in the world. Everywhere. Including the US, UK, Netherlands, China. Your richest countries, your biggest agriculture superstars still depend on subsidies. So agriculture में subsidy तो रहेगा. Why do we still want it? Because life is not just about efficiency. Food is therefore a food security concern. It's a strategic concern. So we will have to continue subsidizing, but it cannot be through cross-subsidizing in such a way that it breaks the back of the sector which will grow. Because your fertilizer, whatever, electricity, everything is free. When diesel is free, you overuse it. You are going to drill the land down and grow paddy. It's the same case as sugarcane in Maharashtra. So you see, when you give free, there are going to be distortions. Or फिर distortions lead to all kinds of newer and longer term distortions. So we have to unwind it and look at the real cost of doing business, even in agriculture. Okay? Then there was a question on the jobs. Let me tell you, jobs is the biggest, it's like the biggest piece of the puzzle. And the reason I'm saying it's a puzzle is because India has a peculiarly low labor force participation rate. What is labor force participation and how is it different from unemployment? Unemployment is if you're looking for the work and not getting it. Labor force participation is you are in the working age and are you at least looking or working? Then you are in the labor force. China's labor force participation for the last 50 years has been around 75%. Vietnam around 72% for the last 20 years. You know what is India's labor force participation rate? It's not even 50%. Meaning 50% of our population in the age group 18 to 59 are neither working nor they are looking for work. So फिर क्या कर रहे हैं? That's why I said it's a puzzle. Women are a large part of that puzzle. Women are getting educated, but they are not entering the labor force. And it is not a happy choice. That's why today there is an entire policy we are designing around what is called care economy. On an average, a working age woman in India spends 7 hours a day taking care of someone. Either children or the elderly or handicapped or whatever. But care is a woman's problem. As a society, you're still conservative. You want children. You're not happy with cats and dogs and plants. So the cost of that is borne only by the women. So ye to hoga. In fact, you know the country which has seen the biggest decline in labor force participation is the country which has witnessed a crash in the fertility rate, South Korea. Because again, just like India and China, these are countries which are traditional countries. But over time, women are making choices. The Japanese population is shrinking, the South Korean population is shrinking, women are not having children. Until we bring about the right policies, and the policy is not just the government's job, it has to be in the families. It has to be, the boys have to share the responsibility. Your family structure is breaking down very fast. You don't have joint families anymore. So nuclearizing families, urbanizing family means the burden of child care or elderly care is now borne by the woman in the house. PhD kar le, what are you going to do with it? You still need care. So you need to, therefore, and we call it a market failure. Why is it a market failure? Because US has a lot of money, but that is the only country which has 0 days of paid maternity leave. 0 days. That's what the market gets you, you know. If you trust only in free markets, that's what it gets you. 0 days of paid maternity leave in the most affluent country in the world. So it's not resources. It's the values. And you know, if you read economics, and I really hope you do, read somebody called Angus Deaton. He won the Nobel Award in 2015. He calls it deaths of despair. Life expectancy of US, Midwest, white population is falling. First time in human history. You're seeing life expectancy fall. अरे growth और development के साथ तो लोगों को ज़्यादा दिन जीना चाहिए. And he attributes that to breakdown of family. So families are important. Either we learn it now by saying let's rescue the women to preserve the family, or we learn it the really hard way, which the US is doing right now. And the COVID pandemic made it very stark. Because the first time in history we saw so many elderly people die alone, with no kin, no family. So you see the values are very closely linked with economic policy. So care economy is a big issue for us. It is one of the biggest points in the New Delhi G20 declaration, that we are going to build care infrastructure. That is going to be a big push. Creches honge, old age homes honge, walkway, we have to do a lot. But all of these really frees up the woman. Okay? So happy to take questions later maybe.
No, I think that's the very last question.
This will be the last
Very
question.
So I'll just combine a few things. And I think I'll begin with a comment that the death of despair thing, it's not just Angus Deaton. I think his wife and case is as involved as more involved.
Yes.
And it would have been nice had you quoted her as well.
Yes.
So coming back to my question, because we're talking about data and in particular about how we work with that data. So the government hasn't released data on farm suicides, on jobs, on NCRB, lynchings and stuff like that. So because we're talking about decentralization of data so much, do you not think government withholding data in fact makes it even more difficult for people, for students, for academics, for researchers to access, or more than that, to study these data? And more than that, the data that we have, it's not really objective how we understand that data, because even the data on bank accounts that we were discussing, that there's, you know, the gender gap has closed, but you know, that's one way to study that there's no gender gap, but who essentially is in power of the money that's deposited in those accounts? Are the women who own these accounts actually in power of the money? Are their husbands not interrupting, or you know, really
Good. All good questions.
Yeah, right.
But this is where there is some hope if you guys read research and you're not swayed by what you read in the newspapers. First of all, I am guilty as charged, and this is something I offered. Anne Case and Angus Deaton wrote the book, Deaths of Despair. Angus has written a second book, which has just come out, and I just finished reading it, called Economics in America. And you should read it to understand why economics in India should be different. We cannot make the same mistakes these guys do. Right? The issue about data not being there, you see, that is what I feel sad when I have to explain it to you guys. I don't feel so sad when I have to speak to journalists. Do you know पहले NFHS कितने often होते थे? You know, National Family Health Survey. How often did we do it? Anyone? No. Between 2003 and 2014, how many rounds of NFHS did we get? 1. Since 2014 to today, how many NFHS have we had? 2. The third one is there. So, bust these myths. Don't go by newspapers written usually by journalists who don't read any research. Next, PLFS, because you mentioned jobs. You know, because we used to really worry, employment unemployment rounds were the thick rounds of LSS. Thick round ka matlab hai, every 5 years you ask questions on jobs. So every 5 years we used to get data on jobs. Today, PLFS कितने rounds हो गए पिछले 5 साल में? 6 साल. 6 is underway, 5 is all right. So you have no excuse to give this. You better know better. You should read. So you have more data, but that is not the issue. NCRB data is put out all the time. In fact, I have written tons on it. And by the way, everything that I have shown you, you should be able to replicate, because this is publicly available data. I am not using any of my privileged position to show you analysis which you can't do on your own. So, and data hai, aap analyze to karo. Today, when you say data is like oil. No, data is like crude oil. It's not very useful. You need analytics. That is where you guys, because the economists and people who deal with numbers are better trained than most other social scientists to deal with data. So you are our hope. All right? Then the issue, the last question. That is a very important, and I have, in some sense, the first 10 years after my PhD, I devoted just to that. Because I worked a lot in development finance. Women and the whole microfinance movement that happened, that how much do women gain out of these kind of things? I'll tell you one of my own studies. In Andhra Pradesh, we studied one of the largest non-bank finance companies. एक insurance scheme launch हुआ था, health insurance का. You know what we found? In fact, that paper came out in World Development in 2011. That the whole family has health insurance coverage. But who are the women who are filing claims? Only the women who are actually borrowers. The spouses of the male borrowers never filed claims. So the husbands who are borrowers of all these loans, they have paid a premium to cover the family, but the wives don't know about it. But when the women are borrowers themselves, they know. They know, or when they go for the group meeting, or there is the microfinance, the way it is done, somebody tells them, oh, you're not well. Arey, coverage to hai. Ye wala operation to covered hai. So you see, financial literacy is very closely linked to financial empowerment of women, and financial empowerment of women is very, very closely tied with improvement in livability, quality of life of the family. That's why, though microfinance has not led to major growth, developmentally, the evidence is quite robust that we must empower our women. You don't think of it only as a welfare. When women are financially empowered, children remain in school, the height and weight is better, especially for the girl kids. Intra-household allocation, the kind of stories you're worried about. Health-seeking decision, karti kaun hai? If I'm sick, do I have the power to actually go to the doctor, or should I wait for my husband or my mother-in-law? Economic empowerment and financial empowerment of women leads to a lot of these things. But much more to do. That's why Mudra focuses only on women primarily. You saw the Awas Yojana focusing women. Most of your houses are in the names of women. So women are a very large part of the policies of development in the country. Okay? All right. What a great opportunity, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, ma'am. I now invite Dr. Vimarsh to deliver the vote of thanks.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। मैं इससे पहले कि कुछ शब्दों में मैम का धन्यवाद करें, पर आप जोरदार तालियों से मैम के उद्बोधन के लिए धन्यवाद है। निश्चित तौर पर मैं बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद देता हूँ आदरणीय प्रोफेसर शमिका रवि जी का, मेंबर इकोनॉमिक एडवाइजरी काउंसिल टू प्राइम मिनिस्टर, जिन्होंने अपने वक्तव्य से और आपके बहुत सारी जिज्ञासाओं के समन के माध्यम से महत्वपूर्ण वक्तव्य दिया। यह वक्तव्य ICSSR के सहयोग से उनका एक नियमित कार्यक्रम है अमृत काल विमर्श विकसित भारत यान 2047, इसके तहत इस वक्तव्य का आयोजन किया गया है। निश्चित तौर पर मैम ने बताया कि किस प्रकार से अलग अलग देश की परिस्थितियां अलग हैं, भारत की परिस्थितियां अलग हैं, और भारत की समस्याओं का समाधान राजनीति और नीति के माध्यम से ही होना है, और किस प्रकार से बेहतर शासन के कारण, लगातार सरकारी पहल और प्रयोगों के कारण किस प्रकार से निरंतर हम आत्मनिर्भर होते जा रहे हैं, और बहुत सारी समस्याएं जो इस देश की हैं या रही हैं, जैसे महिलाओं के खिलाफ अपराध, शिशु मृत्यु दर, नवजात शिशु मृत्यु दर या फिर मातृ मृत्यु दर, आयात में गिरावट, इन तमाम बिंदुओं के आलोक में मतलब समावेशी विकास के विविध आयामों को संदर्भित अपने वक्तव्य में आपने बताया कि किस प्रकार से भारत सरकार और बेहतर शासन और सुशासन के कारण, लगातार हो रहे पहल के कारण निरंतर इन समस्याओं का समाधान हो रहा है और भारत निरंतर प्रगति की ओर, आत्मनिर्भर भारत की ओर आगे बढ़ रहा है। एक बार पुनः मैम का इस महत्वपूर्ण उद्बोधन के लिए बहुत बहुत आभार, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। धन्यवाद ICSSR का, अभिनवन तिवारी सर, जिनके मार्गदर्शन में, जिनके सहयोग से और जिनकी गरिमा में उपस्थिति से इस महत्वपूर्ण कार्यक्रम का आयोजन संभव हो पाया। अलका मैम, प्राचार्य रमा मैम और सभी आयोजन से जुड़े लोगों का जिनका सहयोग रहा, आप सबका बहुत बहुत आभार, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। सभी विद्यार्थियों से निवेदन है कि आप लोग 2 मिनट बैठे रहें, आपके प्रमाण पत्र और दूसरी कुछ महत्वपूर्ण औपचारिकताएं 2 मिनट में पूरी होनी है, उसके बाद आप सभागार से बाहर जाएं। एक बार पुनः मैं अपने सभी अतिथियों का धन्यवाद करता हूँ, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।